Act 1, Hook. You ever show up to do something small, like bring your kid a sandwich, and realize you've been living next to a crime the whole time? That's how this starts. I walked into a school cafeteria to surprise my daughter at lunch, and in the space of 30 seconds, I watched someone I trusted turn my child into a joke. I stood there with 2 paper bags thinking this was going to be an ordinary Tuesday, and instead I found out my daughter had been surviving a quiet kind of cruelty for months. And nobody had told me. My name is Daniel Carter. I work in a government office that deals with schools. Not the top seat, not the kind of job that prints on the news every night, but enough to know how systems are supposed to work. My daughter Zoe was 12 the day I walked into Ridgefield Preparatory, a private academy with marble steps brochures full of smiling kids and promises about inclusion. I paid tuition. I believed the brochure. I believed we were buying safety and a future. Turns out, money buys a seat. It doesn't always buy dignity. Act 1, Setup. I pulled into the visitor lot thinking about the meeting I'd canceled to be there, a small rebellion against the calendar that usually eats my life. I carried 2 sandwiches, turkey and Swiss extra pickles, Zoe's favorite. I signed in as a parent, got the little yellow visitor sticker that said Visitor in bold letters, and walked down the hallway lined with framed alumni photos. All smiles, all familiar faces that felt like permission slips for privilege. The cafeteria door opened, and for a second everything looked normal. Chatter trays clinking the warm light over the center tables. Then I saw Zoe, head down, shoulders folding inward, and a woman standing over her like she owned the room, Mrs. Bellamy. You'd know her face from fundraisers, the kind of woman who shakes hands with donors and smiles like business is her religion. Her heels made a sound on the tile, sharp and small, and she grabbed Zoe's arm and pulled her up like she was moving a chair. "Those tables are for the contributing families," Mrs. Bellamy said, loud enough for everyone to hear her voice flat as a stamp. "You don't belong there." She pushed the tray from Zoe's hands. Paper and food scattered and the room divided itself in a blink. Center stage for the privileged, a shadowed strip that ran along the wall where certain kids were expected to eat. Phones came out. Laughter followed. I froze. You ever feel your own powerlessness like a physical weight I had to move, but I also knew how important the act of recording was. So I found a column to hide behind, and I filmed not because I wanted to make a spectacle, but because evidence is the only language institutions sometimes understand. Act 2, Tension and Turning Point. As the minutes ticked by, what I captured stopped being a single mean act and started to look like a consistent policy. Kids in the center, mostly white, mostly laughing. Kids in the shadow, mostly students of color, heads down, moving quickly, taught by silence to be small. A boy raised his hand for water. Mrs. Bellamy cut him off, said, "Refill time is over," while 3 other kids walked to the fountain unchallenged. A teacher passed by and without looking chose the center aisle. It wasn't chaos. It was choreography rules applied to some and not to others. Zoe tried to speak up, once soft as a whisper. "Ma'am, I just wanted to sit with my friend." Bellamy turned slick like a cat who smells fear and finds it delicious. "Your kind get special seating," she spat, and the cafeteria laughed like a chorus. That phrase hit me like an insult, and like a map I realized this had lines, dates, notes, people who'd defended it. This wasn't about one bad apple, it was structural. I stepped out from behind the column. I put the phone in my jacket pocket, still recording, and walked up to my daughter. She looked up relieved and terrified all at once and whispered, "Dad." My voice was calm because I needed it to be calm. "I brought you lunch." Her face changed for a moment. She smiled through a kind of confusion people get when their world briefly rearranges. Mrs. Bellamy saw me. The air changed. She assessed me with a look that said, "I know exactly where you fit in the ecosystem, and it isn't here." "Sir, you can't be recording," she said, like she was reminding me of a rule. The principal, a smooth man named Mr. Whitcomb, walked over with the practiced frown administrators wear when they're training for damage control. He told me to leave. He told me I was causing a disturbance. I told him I wanted answers. Zoe grabbed my sleeve and begged me to go, tears already forming, whispering, "Please, Dad, they'll kick me out." That's the moment that split me in 2. The part of me that wanted to protect her by removing the threat, and the part of me that saw the larger ledger. If I left, the cruelty would keep going. If I stayed, I risked making things worse for her in the short term. My daughter asked me to run, and I realized how often children try to rescue their parents' conscience by being brave. I let the scene escalate on purpose. I called people I knew. I put pressure on every level: my office's civil rights liaison, the state oversight folks, the hotline for private schools that took federal dollars. The school called security. They escorted me off campus. As they pushed me toward the parking lot, I heard Mrs. Bellamy say to the room at large, "Good, problem solved." What she thought she'd solved was a man with a sandwich and nothing else. What she didn't know was that sandwiches sometimes come with receipts. Act 3. Confrontation and Resolution. I drove 2 blocks, parked where I could still see the front doors, and I made calls. Some people don't have that option. They don't have a number to ring or a badge to wave. I had connections, yes, but I used them like a lever for everyone who had no leverage. Within an hour, teams from the Office of Education Accountability and a federal civil rights unit were on site. Agents walked into a room that had been operating for years behind a veil of civility and asked to see logs, seating charts, fundraiser lists, and most damning old emails that mentioned keeping donor families comfortable. Those emails existed with dates and signatures. When investigators played the video back in the school's office with the principal and Mrs. Bellamy standing there, you could feel the air compress. The woman who had been so sure of her right to segregate broke in a way that wasn't cinematic. It was procedural. Her words, once the centerpiece of humiliation, were now quoted back to her on a screen, loud and undeniable. The school froze as systems of accountability moved and funding was put on hold, audits began, and internal personnel files were searched like open books. There was a legal cascade: charges for civil rights violations, administrative hearings, federal oversight. But the real victory wasn't counting convictions. It was Zoe walking back into that cafeteria weeks later and choosing her seat, not having to shrink herself to fit someone else's comfort. It was other kids being invited to the center table. It was the school board rewriting policy to require transparency about seating discipline and funding allocation, because if money comes with strings, so does oversight. And yes, there were consequences. Mrs. Bellamy and the principal left in disgrace. Legal settlements were reached, and the school faced federal restrictions until reforms were made. That part makes great headlines. The tougher part is the slow daily work of repairing trust, of teaching kids that they matter not because of a donor list, but because they are humans. Epilogue. Open ending. Call to action. But let's not pretend a single episode cleans everything. The reforms at Ridgefield are real, and the policies that came out of it helped hundreds of kids elsewhere, yet in the first year after the investigation, thousands of tips poured into hotlines across the country. The pattern repeats: small cruelties, institutionalized into policy, normalized until someone with nothing but a phone decides to press record. Change came here because someone refused to accept that's how things are, and because a system existed to act on the evidence. That is both a comfort and a warning. So here's where I leave you with a question, because this is not just my story, it's everyone's. Where are the Mrs. Bellamys in your town? Where are the shadow tables, the whispered "you're kind" comments, the practices everyone tolerates because that's how we've always done it? How many kids are choosing to be smaller so their parents won't get dragged into a fight? If you saw it, what would you do? Sit down and eat lunch with them, record it, call someone, walk away. If this story hit you hard or made you uncomfortable, don't just tap like and scroll. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen something like this? Did you speak up or did you look away? What would you do if it were your kid? If you have a story, share it. If you disagree with the way I handled it, argue with me. I want the debate. I want the mess, because conversations make policy and policy makes safety. And if you care about what schools are teaching kids about dignity, not just math or history, but respect, share this video. Talk to your PTA. Ask where the money goes. Eat lunch with a kid. Document what you see. Because the real power isn't in any one title or badge. It's in the number of people who refuse to pretend they don't see and who make sure a single lunch stop becoming a viral moment turns into lasting change.